the ship owner has three choices: burn heavy, scrub out your sulphur, or switch to a cleaner fuel such as LNG.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to the 146th episode of the Shipping Podcast, where you will be listening to my conversation with Mark Bell, who is the General Manager for the Society for Gaseous Marine Fuel. We speak about the roadmap to a more sustainable maritime industry and how we can achieve the sustainability goals set to 2030 and 2050. I hope you will enjoy our conversation as much as I did. This is Mark Bell for you. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning or good day. My name is Mark Bell. I'm the General Manager for an organisation called the Society for Gaseous and Marine Fuel. And I've been running that for about 6 years since its inauguration in 2013.
And what is your background?
I'm a marine engineer by trade. I started my career going to sea, very, very happily to do so. And I quickly realised that if I was going to become a professional chartered engineer, I had two choices. So one was to stay at sea and do it the long route, but then I would have to stay at sea until the bitter age of 35 to become a chartered engineer. Or if I came ashore and did a first degree in engineering, I could do it much faster, 10 years earlier. So I bit the bullet, even though I was paid very well, being shot at in the Gulf on tankers, to come ashore and do a degree. And then after that happened, I moved quickly into classification societies. So many years with two of the big three class societies, Lloyd's Register and DNVGL, working in many parts of shipping. So a very enjoyable time where I cut my teeth on what ships are really about.
But how did you come in contact with the maritime industry from the beginning?
I guess in my very, very early days, my father is an aeronautical engineer, so I was always interested in how things work and how things are put together. But the defiant part of me thought, well, I'm not going to go in the aerospace route. I'm going to go for what really interests me is big, heavy engineering, and shipping was the perfect match of that. So big engines, big ships, big propellers, big everything is what motivated me.
My question goes back to that it's very rare that people are looking for us, looking to see what we are doing. So it's usually a banana leaf somewhere or a relative who's telling you that this is the place to be.
Yeah. And of course, those early years as periods at sea when you're that age is a wonderful experience. Not only for doing what you like to do and are learning about, but to travel and to see the world and get that experience is invaluable.
So what is the Society for Gas as a Marine Fuel? Please tell me.
Yeah, thank you. The Society for Gaseous Marine Fuel, SGMF, is the new kid on the block, as I like to call it. We're an organisation that's been set up principally to make sure that these low flashpoint fuels, are safe and sustainable. So we're taking all of the experience of the maritime cargo industry in cryogenics and applying that to the fuel part. So we're a membership-based organisation. We're over 150 members right across the value chain in this space. And my job is to make sure that all of that best practice, all that knowledge is funneled into specific guidelines and help for the industry to keep it safe and to keep it sustainable. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. Well, I say we're the new kid on the block. We're young. We're relatively young in terms of this type of organisation. Most of our peers are sort of 30, 40, 50 years old. We're about 5, 6 years old. And we're very young, very new.
Yeah, but that has to do with the fact that it's been lately that we have been discussing alternative fuels, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And what a great opportunity to set up something like this and to bring that to the fore. So it's the challenge is to use that experience, but also to make it synthesized and understandable and straightforward for the industry, to keep it safe. But most importantly, I think now is to make it sustainable. So in the early days, it's very much safe working practices and safe working distances and training and competence and guidelines and procedures to, rather than carrying the cargo in your tanks and taking it from one place to another, you're actually using that cargo as a fuel. So even though the item itself is the same, all the principles and everything around it when you start using it as a fuel are different to those as a cargo. So it's not as if you take it from one place to another and forget about it. You're actually using it as you move through the water. So it's a different attitude. And then when you combine the fact that you're talking about, in this case, or in many cases, cryogenic fuels, so low temperature, there's a different perspective to bear in mind there in terms of how you handle it and how you keep it safe and how you use it sustainably.
How's that? Please explain.
I guess when you're handling fuels that are at room temperature and, if you spill them, drop one, everyone's going to throw their arms up and worry about the pollution consequence. If you spill or drop cryogenic fuels, obviously you're going to burn yourself in the first instance if you come into contact with it. If you combine that with the fact that if you did do it, you're possibly talking about a greenhouse gas, then you better be extra careful that you contain it. There's also a large amount of misunderstanding around some of these fuels as to what they would do, aka it's a floating bomb and it's all going to go wrong. Well, actually, that's a complete myth. So a large part of our role is to bust those myths and tell it like it is as to what it does. So indeed, something like that for LNG, for methane, for example. The thing you've got to be most concerned about is you don't want to lose it in the first place because it's your fuel and it's costs quite a bit of money to put it there. But it's not going to go bang. But if it did happen, well, what would you do about it? And make sure that you have contingencies in place to take care of that, to avoid it in the first place is what I'm saying. And that's quite a big task. So education, understanding is a large part of our role, as also the actual benefits of what it does.
Mm. Well, I live in Sweden, and I think we were among the first ones to have these SECA areas, the sulfur cap. It was, I think, in North America, and then it was, from Norway and English Channel, and then the Baltic Sea. So 5 years ago, it was everyone was talking about LNG over here. Was that the road forward or wasn't it? And so on. And I was amazed to see all these thinking caps and what they came up with. So we have a small island outside Gothenburg, which is called Dunse. And they have been really, really propelling this LNG business and how to do it and why and so on. I think almost all of the ship owners out there, and I think there are 8 of them, have LNG vessels. I think it was very exciting to see how they came around to decide the LNG and how they worked together with the authorities and the politicians and so on, because it's not only to decide to have an LNG vessel and order it. Then you need to think about the infrastructure. Where do you go to put in some new fuel into it once you are trading? Yeah. So how is that nowadays? How is the bunker infrastructure for LNG?
Well, thank you. It's nice that you mentioned the Donzo cluster as they're affectionately known, because they were right in the middle of, as you rightly say, the SECA. And the SECA came along. Let's explore that just for a little bit as to make sure everyone knows what that's about. Because I think it's important to understand in the history of and the future of maritime fuels. In some ways, maritime has done a good job, but gets a bad name for itself. And I'll tell you the story of where we are up to now and what the future looks like. Because, well, SECA, what does that mean? Well, you're going to take sulfur out of heavy fuel oil. Well, what does that mean? Well, what is heavy fuel oil and why do ships use this? Well, I think the easiest way to think about it is that ships use what's left at the bottom of the barrel of crude oil. So when all the goodies have been taken out and it gets thicker and more like treacle and right at the bottom and more difficult to deal with and to handle, it just so happens that it's a very useful fuel for shipping. So cut a long story short, over the last 50 odd years, shipping has become really, really good at making best use of that residual fuel oil that's come out of the world's refineries. And the rest is kind of history. So it's done a very, very, very nice job, I think, in many ways, of going from taking basically treacle and developing extremely sophisticated machinery that can deal with that fuel in the best way. And at the same time as helping the world's refineries, shall I say. So that's a good story. That's a nice story to know about. But lo and behold, in the bottom of that barrel of crude oil, you have something called sulfur. And if you burn sulfur, you know what the consequences are. So coming right up to speed, international regulation declared that thou shalt take sulfur out of your fuel oil. Well, if you're going to take sulfur out of the fuel oil, that means that, and you're regulated to do so, as were the so-called Saker zones, the Baltic being a famous one of them.
Decided by the IMO,
Yeah, that's going to cost money. You're going to take the sulfur out. So what else could we do? Well, we take the sulfur out. That means to basically refine it, blend it, use low sulfur feedstocks. Or we could use alternative fuels that don't have sulfur in the first place. So then you get to the point of, well, what are your solutions that you can come up with? And LNG was one of them, and still is obviously is a significant option. LNG being the shortest molecule. You're going from the longest chain hydrocarbon molecule in heavy fuel oil to the shortest one, CH4. And that's a story whereby if you use that, are you going to retrofit your ships? Are you going to build new ships? By and large, if you're going to build a new ship, it's a good option to take. If you're going to retrofit it, maybe it takes sort of 5, 10, 15 years before there's a turnover and a change rate in the ship before you change that. So going back to the Donzo cluster, right place, right time, plenty available, and a natural option for them. So then for them to champion the cause was a good place to be. So coming right up to speed in terms of where we are now with the compliant choices, there are only 3 right now. 3 compliant solutions that you have. 1, you can burn low sulfur heavy fuel oil when you can get it. 2 is you can continue to burn your heavy fuel oil with sulfur in it, but you use something called a scrubber system to take out the sulfur before it goes into the atmosphere. And with an open loop system or a closed loop system, some places in the world you can pump it over the side, others you can't, putting it quite bluntly. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide whether that's going to be allowable, dare I say, sustainable in the future, which leads your ship owner back to think about, well, what am I going to do next? Which leads you to the third option here, which is natural gas. And it is natural gas. It's liquefied natural gas, natural being it's a fossil fuel, but the simplest hydrocarbon. And dare I say, when you burn it in these combustion processes, the most efficient and cleanest. It doesn't have all those things that you have in the bottom of a barrel of crude oil by its very nature. So there we are. It kind of brings you right up to speed in terms of the options that you have. And ships, by their very, very nature, have to take their fuel with them. They can't plug into the grid. They can't recharge themselves. The amount of displacement and the amount of cargo that you're moving is a double-edged sword, because it being a very efficient means of moving cargo around the world also means it takes a significant amount of power. So if you want to continue with that cargo capacity, you're going to have fuel with you for the foreseeable future. So there are not a lot of options to choose from. There are not a lot of options on the table. So coming back to reality, the ship owner has 3 choices. Burn heavy, scrub out your sulfur, or switch to a cleaner fuel such as LNG.
And then the bunker. That is what I asked you about. The bunker, how is that? How can you do it, and where can you do it?
And that's the interesting conundrum, because the world's bunkering industry, I mean, you know where ships are bunkered and where they're refueled along the main shipping lanes is the easiest way to think about it, and that makes sense. So all of a sudden you say, okay, we've got this abundant but new fuel on the block. Where can I get it from? Am I going to build a ship that runs on LNG when I don't know where I'm going to get my fuel from? Whereas right now I can get it from 2,200 ports around the world. Where can I get LNG from? And that was quite an interesting conundrum at the beginning of this story, because LNG is everywhere and nowhere. There are plenty of gas terminals around the world. But if you rock up to one of them and say, can I have some of your LNG, please, to fuel my ship? They'll kind of look at you a bit strangely and think, who are you? What are you? And why are you here? So that's been a mindset change. And in terms of the infrastructure itself, indeed, it's taken on a rapid development phase in terms of making it available in the right places, in the right formats, with the right systems and the right procedures in place, which is right smack bang in the middle of a lot of the work that we've been doing. So it's coming up rapidly in terms of the infrastructure, but it does take time. It has something that I call the gas factor in terms of the time it takes, the cost that's involved, the complexity that's there in order to keep it safe. But once you've got that, you have leapfrogged one awful lot of other obstacles in one fell swoop, one of them being the international regulation that it faces.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I'm thinking about ports and infrastructure and how do I become an interesting port for ship owners? I mean, I think LNG has been part of what they can compete with other ports about.
Yeah, I mean, one of our key sectors of membership are the port authorities, and the forward-thinking port authorities, if I can use that expression, have been quick and keen to embrace this fuel. Never mind the ones that have existing gas or chemical operations in their ports. They've been quick to realise the benefits to the shipping community, but also been quick to realise the benefits to their own hinterland, as it were. So a port authority, in terms of its operation, think of some of the mega ports of the world and the amount of space that they occupy. Quite often that's close to large populations, and it can have a significant impact on their livelihood. So not only are they choosing to embrace that for the shipping, but they're also choosing to embrace that for their own operations as well. So the classic example would be somewhere like Port of Rotterdam. So you're driving in your car on the way to work in the morning, and you driving along in your diesel car, and you turn on your radio and you listen to, you've all heard of the VW Dieselgate scandal, and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm driving a diesel car. What does that mean? And you look out the right-hand side of your window and you'll see one of the world's largest cruise ships there running on, dare I say, diesel at that time. And you might look at the exhaust coming out of that ship. Well, the point is that ship is right smack bang in the middle of the city carrying out its operation. And yet there are only 200 cruise ships on the planet as we speak, by and large. 30 miles away in the port of Rotterdam, you've got 100 times the number of vessels, but you don't see them. The public doesn't see that part of the shipping industry. It only sees, what's right under its nose. And yet, in terms of the larger picture, shipping is out of sight, out of mind, literally over the horizon to the public at large. So it's a hidden industry, but a vitally important one for all of us. So it's an important job, I think, for organizations like ours and other groups to make the public aware of what shipping does and what part it plays in the community, and to help it to understand the challenges it faces, rather than taking them for granted, I would say. So don't just look at the cruise ship in the port and think that's shipping, because, you and I both know it's a different story.
Which leads me to my favorite question. How do we become more visible? Do you have any ideas of how we can do that?
Yeah, I think it's a case of advocacy is probably the wrong word, but when it comes to the specific discussions and arguments, and in this case it's the debate around fuels, is to describe where your products and goods come from. It's all very well to know that you can get strawberries in December in Gothenburg, and you can get whatever produce at any time, at any place in the world. Well, a large part of that is due to shipping logistics and making sure that it can happen. If you ask the average individual that doesn't really have an awareness of shipping or what it's about, ask them where that comes from. Well, does it come from the supermarket? I'll put my plug in the wall. Where does the electricity come from? It's the same type of discussion. So the more that we can stand up for ourselves, I think, and say what shipping does, not in an I told you so way, but more in an educational way as to how this works. Not only does it help that understanding, but it also gives an appreciation right at the point of sale, as it were, for products. Am I doing the right thing? Is this sustainable? What is the bigger picture? How did this get to me? Why would I want to be doing this when actually I can get it from my own area, for example, which kind of brings into the whole logistics argument for shipping and how it's got to where it is, and hopefully in the longer term pave the way for more efficiency. So gentle education, advocacy of what's sustainable, and a gradual process. I think it's not going to happen overnight, and certainly important to encourage and develop the youngest generation's ideas in this space, because it's going to be their choices as what happens in the future, rather than just growth at the expense of everything. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a bit of a situation as the world finds itself now.
We have a tendency to speak to each other because we love this industry so much. I think that is our Achilles heel. We only talk to people who knows what we're talking about. It takes a little bit more, and you need a little bit more to be brave or to stand up to speak to other people. And not only at dinner parties and things like that.
Indeed. And speaking humbly as an engineer, to describe what you do in the engineering space for shipping, to me, it's fascinating. To others, maybe not so. So to make that interesting and to understand what it's about is a skill and an aptitude, I think, which we can all work on. I mean, I'm fascinated by large engines, by propulsion systems that can run on the simplest fuels and yet provide that amount of propulsive power in that efficient way. I think it's fascinating. But to describe that whole process and that whole transfer to a younger audience, I think we've all got a part to play. Myself undertake to, when I get the opportunity, talk to schools and colleges about what it's about. And it's really quite satisfying to see the looks on their faces and to see the interest that comes up. But you can't do that in a droll way like I'm talking to you now. You have to use some other tools and methods, which is, I think, a skill we can all use.
So who are your members? Who are the members of the Society for Gas as a Marine Fuel?
Yeah, it's a very diverse group. It's not a niche group. It's not just engine manufacturers. It's not just energy suppliers. It's not just port authorities or valve manufacturers or equipment suppliers. It's all of them. It's the whole piece right throughout the value chain. I mean, the buzzword at the moment is well to wake. So from where the oil or the gas comes out of the ground to the wake of the ship in terms of it being used, it's that whole value chain is represented by our membership. So that's a benefit and a challenge at the same time, because they're a very diverse group of very diverse interests. But the one thing that does bring them all together is that business. And certainly an understanding of that it's a good thing to be doing, I think, is one common trait that's coming out of this whole process. It's an interesting common theme that I'm seeing amongst our members. Oh yeah, but we're a member of the Society for Gas as Marine Fuel. What does that do? Well, it's helping reduce shipping's footprint by 15% on GHGs. That type of thing is something to be proud of, I think, for all of our members.
And how do you work? I mean, do you get them to speak to each other, or how do you? Because I mean, I think that is part of the secret sauce, to get people who doesn't know anything about what the other people are doing to speak to each other. Yeah,
very much so. And it's you'll hear this all throughout the industry in terms of the projects that are being done. It's a collaborative process. It's no one group or one company can do it by themselves. Quite often, one of them has the idea. And as you mentioned there in the early days in that group in Donso, I'm a ship owner. This is a great thing to do. I want to do it. Okay, go and make it happen. You've got to choose your partners very, very carefully. And you've got to collaborate with like-minded organizations that are thinking along the same space. And that's one of the things that SGMF does, is bring those groups together. help them understand each other's juxtaposition, but work towards a common goal. So as I said at the start, our main reason to be is the safe and sustainable use of these fuels. If you've got a port authority, a ship owner, a classification society, a shipbuilder, an OEM, they've all got different interests, but they're all working towards the same package. And the classic scenario whereby, you know, the ship's build process is but 12 to 24 months, let's say, just to hand it over to the operator and say, there you go, off you go. You've now got it for, let's say, 25 to 35 years. That process is also changing as well. So it's an understanding of the full life cycle sustainability part of shipping is a common trait amongst our members in understanding what each other's needs and requirements are, rather than just I do my part, then I hand it over to you, and you do your part, you hand it over to you. And your question there about the infrastructure and where I get my fuel from is a key one in that argument, because it's, I say this tongue in cheek, relatively straightforward and relatively easy to build a ship and run it on energy. Is it? Well, you can build it and you can get it on the quayside, but getting your infrastructure together and where you're going to get your fuel from and having that whole value chain in place takes a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnerships. And I'm pleased to see that a lot of the energy majors, a lot of the port authorities, a lot of the operators, bunker operators are collaborating very well in that space. And that only comes from a common understanding of making the project work, all to a common good. So that's nice to see. So it's a key part of our role in what we do. And how do we do that on the ground? Well, we have a technical committee. We have an environmental committee. We have a whole series of work groups running at any one time. So it's great to see not only in normal times of working, the collaboration that goes on within those groups, but in this virtual space that we are now, which I have to say is a really efficient space, it's the same process.
Mm. And how do you see the future for shipping in general?
I see the future for shipping as very bright. I see it as sustainable. I think for the first time in history, the IMO is ahead of the curve. It has taken the opportunity to think ahead about what it needs to do for the future, dare I say, rather than waiting for something to happen before doing something about it. So it's not waited for a Titanic to say that you must have life jackets and lifeboats. It's not waited for a series of groundings before going double hull. It's not waited for an incident before reacting. It's kind of said, well, this is what we think we need to be doing by 2050, 40, 30 in terms of emissions. Now, industry, what are you going to do about it? So there's a window of opportunity now for the industry itself to grasp that challenge and meet it, rather than wait for, okay, your emissions are going to be this. If you don't, you're going to be, dare I say, regulated or penalized. So there's an opportunity now whereby, for the first time, the industry has the opportunity to meet the challenge, as opposed to being told what to do, else be regulated. So that's a shift. Will that happen for very long? No. Will it start to be regulated? You've already seen it. If you think the sulphur cap was the elephant in the room, think about the carbon cap. It's overwhelming. Sulphur is relatively easy to deal with. Carbon is a whole different ballgame, as we all know. So don't keep pushing that one to the horizon. Grasp it now and think about what that pathway to low carbon fuels and ultimately zero carbon fuels is going to look like. Bearing in mind all the challenges, all the technology we are going to have to develop to be able to meet that challenge. It's a unique opportunity for shipping. So I think it's bright. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but it does need to get on with it. The clock is ticking. There are but 58,000 ships on the planet, over 500 gross tons. Shipping is pretty much directly proportional to the number of people we have on the planet in terms of the amount of cargo that's moved around the world. They're inextricably linked. I'll be the first one to say that population growth isn't going to go down at any time in the future. So you know what's going to happen with shipping growth in proportion to that. So it's a double whammy to be able to solve the reduction in emissions while shipping growth continues. And in very simple terms, More ships, more cargo, more displacement, more water being pushed out the way, more water being pushed out the way, more energy being used, more emissions. So you're going to have to do two things at the same time to be able to halve your emissions by 2050. That's a tough call. And here's the key part to this. Probably, well, definitely, there is no one golden fuel that solves that problem. There is a persistent debate that, there's got to be a perfect fuel that we can suddenly use here and just drop it in and it's going to solve it for us. Let me tell you, no, there isn't. LNG, as an example, we did a study 18 months ago, which we're just updating now with latest data, but the number won't change very much. If the whole world fleet switched tomorrow to LNG, on average, it would save itself 15% GHGs. 15%. Not 20, not 30, not 50, but 15. So what? You think, well, if it doesn't solve the whole problem, then why would I do it? Well, you cannot reach those 50, 30 or 20% without its use. There's no one single solution. So whilst it's a very worthwhile discussion, debate and challenge to go along with these pathway fuels, of which LNG, I believe, is the first one, you cannot meet those targets without its use. It's as simple as that. And that's quite a devastating thing to say, because it has to go down this route if it's going to get towards those reductions. But I'll be the first one to say just the use of the fuel its own is not going to achieve those reductions. So then you'll ask me, well, how else am I going to get the rest of it? Where else is that going to come from? And I think in threes. So I think in three axes, X, Y, Z, if you want to call it, being an engineer. So the X axis is the fuels debate and the pathway of the fuels. And you hear about, well, okay, we go from coal to oil to LNG to the alcohols to the ammonias to ultimately hydrogens, whichever pathway you want to choose. That's the X axis. And we're on that pathway already. The other two axes, well, what are those? Well, the y-axis, if you like, are the operations of the ship, and included in that, I would also include there the technology that's involved. So those two are inextricably linked. I talked about diesel propulsion, well, compression ignition engines that you can basically burn anything in as long as you get them hot enough, they'll burn. The drop-in fuels, that's why you see this part. Well, what's next? How's that going to be dealt with? How can I operate them at ultimate efficiency all the time? Those are the sorts of things that we need to be really extrapolating and working on. Operation of the vessel itself in terms of do I have two engines or do I have one? Do I have 8 cylinders or do I have 2? Do I have skip firing or not? What is the load transfer sequence? What are the operational profiles? How do I add all that up together? Not just once I've got my ship in the water, but at the design stage, what are the requirements here to keep it on song, to keep it operating at its maximum efficiency all the time? That's the y-axis. And then it comes to the third one, which is probably the most difficult in terms of what we're grappling with here. And that's what I will call global logistics. You know, the whole regime of moving all this cargo and all this product around the world is driven by other factors, which I'll be the first one to say I don't fully understand, but they are there. How can that be more efficient? In my perspective, could I get away with 8 ships instead of having 10? Could I get away with 6 types instead of having 4? What's the optimal logistics pattern to get those products and goods from one place to another? The whole logistics argument for global trade, really, is that efficient? How's that going to be in the future? Is it worthwhile buying the TV from Asia and getting it to America and then selling it secondhand and putting it back to Europe? Well, shipping, by and large, carries that type of thing around the world. That can't be efficient. But I think that's the most challenging axis of all, and driven by things which are outside of the space. So 3 axes there. But coming back to the point, if you just focus and compete, this perpetual debate that there's going to be a magic fuel, I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. And I've just mentioned the candidates there, and a continued debate to try and get to one of them. It will only sort of increase your propensity not to meet those targets.
I have 2 things I want to add to your axis. Digitalisation is one.
Yeah.
and then a generational shift. I think the more young people we get into this business, the more new ideas we might also have. And I think this pandemic has made people start to think about the future and maybe change their mindset as well. Because for a while there was it was impossible to have meetings online. You had to meet, you had to sit down, and you had to shake your hands and all of that. And now people have been forced to do online virtual meetings. I think we will come back to, fortunately, meet people again, because we are a people's business. But on the other hand, it has shown people that maybe I can do things another way, which is the beginning of a new mindset. And also, maybe in the old days, I think you lived shipping until you died. So you hardly ever retired. No one retired. People were, until they died, more or less. And maybe now you can see that it's changing too fast. So maybe I should enjoy some retirement instead of dying on my post, so to say.
Yeah.
So I think these two will add on a layer to your access in a way to maybe speed it up.
Yeah, certainly. Bringing the younger generation is a trick that we've all missed, and I would say that shipping is not alone in that as a sector in that respect by any means. Taking it for granted and just assuming that it will happen is its own fault in many ways. Okay, aviation is visible to everybody. Shipping is invisible to most, and when it comes to challenging times like we have now, it's his own worst enemy because it's by its own default. It hasn't raised its profile. I gave the analogy there of it uses what's left at the bottom of a barrel of crude oil. Well, guess what's going to happen next? If it doesn't get ahead of that curve, it will get the next fuel that nobody else wants. Wow, okay. It doesn't do itself any favors. So awareness and younger generations certainly.
And still, we have delivered during the pandemic. We have delivered.
Absolutely.
All that toilet paper that everyone was afraid of losing out was delivered.
Yeah, and the age-old question on how to make it more attractive. Well, look at the challenges there for autonomous shipping right now to make them with no individuals on board, which I think is incredulous but fascinating at the same time. To autonomize that whole process and what's going to be required to make that happen. What a challenge! As an engineer, I think that's absolutely fascinating. We all fly on aircraft, or we did fly an aircraft where, by and large, nobody touches the controls from one terminal to the next. Yet, how many people know about that? Well, for a ship to do that, it sounds quite a challenge, but actually, come on. So that I think that there are great opportunities and challenges there, certainly on the technology and that side for the younger generation. But again, it comes back to how to make it attractive to them in the first place, and to be ahead of the game a little bit, to raise the profile for shipping to stand up for itself when it comes to these challenges. I think it could do itself a big favor in many ways.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think I said that 150 times.
Yeah.
That we need to raise the profile, because then people will just love to come into this industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a gathering, and we will be having those gatherings again shortly, I'm sure, called Gas Fest, for one extent of a phrase, whereby we gather many facets of the industry together, not only the ones that I just described, but outside of there, the financiers, the underwriters, the bankers, the academics, to come and look at these conundrums and help us with a strategy, help us with a plan. To cut a long story short, one of the outcomes of the last gathering we have, and we took it on as SGMF, was to produce a short little 90-second video about what this means, which was actually great fun. It taught me one thing: I'm never going to be an animator or producer of films in any which way, shape or form. But to be able to have the opportunity to tell that story succinctly was a great project. And I believe just a tiny step in the right direction to help tell the story of what shipping does and tell it how it is, and get society to help us with the challenges that we face is an important part.
Okay, Mark, thank you for your time. Who would you be curious to listen to in a shipping podcast? Who do you think I should approach the next?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one thing that I'm always looking for is a leader, and dare I say, an icon that can take the challenge for shipping forward. So a Richard Branson of the shipping world, or a Bill Gates of the shipping world, or an individual such as that understands these principles would be a great individual to talk to. So now you're going to ask me, now I've stalled you and asking on who that individual is. Talk to one of the leaders of a ship operator, of an energy supplier, and of a port authority, and ask them the same set of questions. I think will be a great start on that challenge.
Oh, I am aiming for Sir Richard Branson, so we'll see what happens.
That's the shipping part of my answer. On a humanist part of my answer, I would go and talk to a David Attenborough and ask an individual who was at the forefront of climate change and everything that's around that. As a member of the public, dare I say, what would his opinion be on the shipping sector and how it's affecting all the things that he's dealing with? That would be a really interesting discussion.
I won't do any promises. Thank you, Mark, and best of luck for the future, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you, Mark. I think it's important to sometimes put things in perspective. And that is what I think we did in our conversation. It's very important to think about where we are coming from and where we are heading. Currently, I am participating in a lot of webinars and online meetings, as I presume that you are as well. There's so many things going on online right now, and soon I will probably be able to put together a top 10 list of best practices, or maybe some on not so good practices. I don't know. Would you be interested in taking part and maybe contribute to such a list? Also, due to the pandemic, I see many new podcasts being started, which I welcome. Welcome to the podosphere. This is a young industry, and so many things to do and so many things to learn. But I see famous actors and singers that are now grounded and cannot go on tour or cannot meet their audience that is starting podcasts. But there is also a trend with companies starting their own podcasts. They have realized that maybe the old-fashioned way of traveling to conferences might not be the best way to spend their money. I realize that a lot of the conference organizers in the maritime space are now struggling, as most of their budgets is based on companies sponsoring their gatherings. And instead, they are now starting their own podcasts or doing in-house gatherings and so on. I think I will gather my thoughts on this to my next solo episode. But if you have any questions or suggestions on things you want me to speak about, please drop me a line at hello@shippingpodcast.com. I have to leave you. There is a new webinar to attend. So, from me to you, until the next time, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.